Oahu, of course, has been important because of Honolulu and the government and the center of political activity. And on Oahu, you had very early Portuguese coming. We know of Antonio Ferreira, who helped build a stone house for King Kamehameha. Because of Honolulu's importance, I think it was kind of a center point. But the Portuguese of Oahu tended to spread out so that you have them going to places like Waialua on Oahu, where you have the plantation life dominant. But among the early whalers, you have Paiko, which interestingly enough was probably an anglicization of the word piku. He may have come from Piku, although there's some idea that he may have come from Fayal. But as you know, Fayal and Piku are so close to each other that one person might feel that he was from both islands rather than just one or the other. Fayal might be the place the ship left from, and Piku might be where his home was. There is a group of Pereiras that came on the Monarch to the islands in 1882, and they're known locally as Piku Pereiras or Pereira Picus. They use the two as their surname, the name of the island and the name of the family. Of course, it was the seat of the Roman Catholic Church. Our Lady of Peace was very early. You find Portuguese inscriptions in the neighborhood and under the statue of Our Lady of Peace. And then in 1890, you had the establishment of the Protestant church in Honolulu, which was quite active and merged later with Central Union. So church or school, St. Louis College, is almost thought of as a Portuguese church, school. It's not really a college in our sense. It's a college in the French sense. And later on, of course, it added Chaminade University to the St. Louis College campus. I think of sports. Kamehameha School has many people with Portuguese names who are part Hawaiian, showing the admixture of Hawaiians and Portuguese. So we have plantation, we have, of course, the artisans of the city, workers with jewelry, cabinet making, woodwork. Of course, the Portuguese were very skillful with their hands, and of course, their influence on music with Honolulu and hula and the kingdom and so forth. We have so many stories of the impact of Portuguese music on Oahu, particularly, I think. You have the influence on hymns, hymn singing, performances with the royalty, the ukulele. I think on Oahu you see many survivals of the Portuguese migration, all from the early whaling times down to the present with its contacts with California. There was a period of time, of course, when some families, part of them would go to California, some would stay here. There was back and forth from places like San Leandro, where there's a street known, as you know, as the Rua dos Kanakas. The Kanakas were really Hawaiians who had lived in Hawaii. Hawaiians in the sense they were Portuguese living in Hawaii who migrated to California when it became easy after annexation, which took place in 1898. Portuguese Americans now?
Today, yeah.
Yes. Well, you find a lot of result of intermarriage, a lot of, say, the entertainment world in Waikiki. Many performers will have Portuguese names, perhaps, and be singing in Hawaiian. you see a nice combination of the Portuguese heritage. Of course, the malasadas are very prevalent in Honolulu, often spelled with a single S, which offends purists.
My name is Ellen Souza O. At the beginning, our name was supposed to be Sousa. But when my father was naturalized in 1900, the certificate says Souza, so we carry with the Z instead of the S. So my name is Ellen Souza, spelled with a Z, O. And I was born here in Kakoako in 1919. So that makes me 82 years old now. When we were growing up, we could not speak Portuguese. Just like the Hawaiians could not speak Hawaiians. We were told we were Americans, so Portuguese was not spoken. But fortunately, my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, was living with us, and she used to say, I'm not American. She used to say it in Portuguese. I'm not American, so you speak to me in Portuguese. Even if you can't speak well, I'll understand. That's why our Portuguese is not the way they spoke, where she came from. But she would understand. That's how I know a little bit Portuguese was through my grandmother. And then after she died, no more. There I go, using a Hawaiian word. She no one to speak to. It was my grandmama, that's why I know a little bit Portuguese. So before going to Portugal to see about my heritage, I went to Portuguese school down here to learn. And still yet, they say I speak different because I have an Azorian accent. We don't pronounce our O's. Our O's is just like the word bush has an O at the end. We don't pronounce the O. And we don't. And like my baby Jesus, there's an O at the end. Menino. We don't pronounce. We say manin. But the A's we pronounce like manina, manin. See, we don't pronounce our O's. So they still didn't understand me. Made no difference. But then I used to have open house. When my husband was living, he used to help me. I used to put the sign outside, Feliz Natal, on my garage. And then that's my Portuguese heritage. My Hawaiian heritage was Melikilikimaka. It meant the same. Merry Christmas. And once that sign was up, people knew that my house was open. They would come in. So one day, tourists from Portugal, seeing the sign Feliz Natal, they say, that's Portuguese people living there. So they stopped and they started to speak Portuguese to my husband. My husband says, you better go talk to my wife. So when they came, but they spoke English though, beautiful English. And she came with two teenage boys. And I took her in my house. And as soon as I start speaking, she says, you're Azorian. I says, how can you tell? You don't pronounce your O's. And she says, don't ever speak like the rest of us. Because if you go to any place that's outside of, they'll know where your ancestors came from, just by the way you speak. She said, and do you know, I showed her the games. Oh, her teenage boys were so happy they were doing this. They remember doing it. In Portugal, the same games that my mother taught my children, her teenage boys remember it. So when she got back to Portugal, she sent me a Portuguese doll. She said, I don't think you remember me, but this is a homemade Portuguese doll made by my friend. I did, because she knew I was dressing all my dolls. And she sent me a doll made by one of her friends, a Portuguese doll. And she always told me, don't speak like the rest of them. So I speak the way I speak now. Azorian way of talking. What got me started in my bush, my grandson was sick. He was so sick. We take him to the pediatrician, checks him, everything. Nothing's wrong, couldn't find anything wrong. And I kept watching the doctor, and the doctor was measuring his legs. I noticed one was shorter than the other. That's one of the symptoms of the bush now, because I was taught that. And when I seen the doctor measuring his legs and say, oh, nothing is wrong with your grandson, just give him a lot of water and some aspirins and let him be quiet in bed. So when I came home, I remember what I was taught about the bush. So I got some oil, some olive oil, and I warmed it up. I rubbed my grandson's stomach the way my godmother taught me. My godmother used to do these things. She taught me. So I rubbed my grandson's stomach. And after the rubbing was all done, I tied it up with an old diaper that I had. And in a matter of hours, he was jumping around. His fever was done, all gone, just like nothing had happened. So whenever he got sick, he says, Vovo, I don't want to go, doctor. Rub my stomach. And I says, oh, no, you have to go to the doctor because I don't know. I cannot do anything unless the doctor says you have nothing wrong. So he would be, sometimes I just rub it anyway, and he'd feel good. I don't know if it was in his mind because he knew that when he went to the doctor, he was never well. So evidently, see, he had the bush. Now, the bush that I was taught was a spasm you would have. Like Portuguese people did not want you to throw the children up in the air because some children would get spasms in their intestines. And some of them would fall down, they would get it. Now, I had two children. My son would always get the bush. My daughter never did. So they say some children will get it and others will not. Depends on where you get your spasms. So anyway, when you rub the stomach with the oil, they usually pray. They usually pray. To me, I think the prayer, they prayed, I believe in God in Portuguese. I think was the length of the prayer. You know, the right movements, the length of time to rub. That's what I think now. I wasn't told. That's my opinion. And they would rub the stomach upward with the palm. And as you rub, you feel a lump. I know I did, but later on I realized that lump was the bowel, due to the spasm, could not go through. So the child would get sick, and the doctors couldn't find anything wrong. But there was a pediatrician, my son's pediatrician, Dr. Palmer. If he could not find anything wrong with the child, he would tell them to take it to the Portuguese lady to rub the stomach. So evidently he knew about those spasms and that the rubbing would release the spasm and the gas would come out and the child would be better. That's what I know about the bush. But it was my grandson that got me started to do it. But I did it once. I was taking care of a baby, just a few doors down. They were Orientals. And he was an Oriental from the mainland. She was an Oriental from here. So she believed in those things, but I didn't know anything about it. I thought they were both from the mainland. I was babysitting for her so she could work. And I noticed that the child was limping. The one leg was long. So I drew the mother's attention to it. She says, oh yeah, the doctor says after a certain age they were going to get special shoes for her so the legs would be even. That was her biggest mistake, but she was very grateful later on when she found out what I did. So I measured the child's legs. Sure enough, I did what I was taught, the bush. And about maybe 3-4 months later, she took the child to the doctor to measure the legs for the shoes. The doctor says the baby don't need it anymore. So they came to me, Mrs. O'Day, Mrs. O'Day, what did you do to my baby? Boy, was I scared. She says, don't be frightened. I guess she could see by the expression on my face. She says, my doctor says the baby don't have to wear special shoes now. Her legs are even. Then I told her what I did. So she told me, I was born here, she says. Anything the Portuguese people did for their babies, if you see my baby need it, you go right ahead and do it. So I really helped that baby. Didn't have to wear shoes. See, the doctor didn't know I was going to wear special, but boy, was I scared. Doing something without the permission, yeah? But the child was better after that. And she says the child's personality changed after that. She used to eat cigarette butts, take it from, and she never did that after a while. Her whole personality changed. I learned to do this drawing work. We call it drawing work in English. But the name in Portuguese, I may be pronouncing it wrong, but that's my way of speaking, labirinto em fio tirado. Literally, it means confusion by drawing threads. But we call it drawing work because fio tirado, we call it drawing work. I learned that from my grandmother's cousin. She was the one that taught me how to do that drawing work. My mother had 4 daughters. My mother never forced us to learn anything. Everything was you do what you want. One sister learned tatting, one learned crochet, one learned this. I wanted to learn the Portuguese drawing work. So she took me to my grandmother's cousin, and she's the one that taught me. I have made tablecloths, pillow slips. I even used to make sundresses for my daughter when she was little. Sundress, I used to donate it to the church. You know, when they have church bazaars, I used to donate it. And it was a big goal because not too many people knew how to do it. That is what I call my Portuguese lace because they used to use it on the sheets. They used to use it, we used to call clutch. I don't know, maybe some Portuguese ladies will remember, because we had these panties we used, and then the clutch was something you used on the top, and you had buttons, and you would tie it to your clutch. So whenever we went to the doctor, we had a nice clutch, had drawing work on it, mine did. And for at home, we used flour bags. The clerks were made of flour bags. But when we went to the doctor, oh no, it was nice material. I think it was Indian head, the name of the material. So when the doctor took our dresses out, they seen the drawing work. They had it on sheets, slips, everything, and curtains. But I have made only on my pillow slips to demonstrate. I don't use it on my pillow slips. But I have samples of it to show what they used to do. And then the baby pillows, they even did it on the baby pillows. If you had a little baby boy, when I had my son, my grandma's cousin gave the baby a pillow. It had blue as the lining, and they always made everything in white. Then when I had my daughter, she gave one in pink. So my 2 children had little pillows made with drawing work from my grandmother's cousin. And then my mother had it. She never used it to sleep on, was just to show off, you know. You fix in those days, you don't lie in the bed and read and do anything. Oh, no. The bed was nicely fixed and everything. You never lie on the bed unless you're sick, and then you take everything out. The pillows were taken out, and then you can lie. But like us now, we're not like that. We just lie in the bed and could care less. But in those days, no. And then they had these nice square pillows. I donated one to the Bishop Museum in 1978, I think I did, because they didn't have anything of that type of work made by the Portuguese people. And they had straight chairs. They put these pillows on the chair, and when my mother would take me over to my grandma's cousin's house, we had to take the pillow, because it was beautiful, yeah, put it on the floor, and then we'd sit on the chair. When we left, we'd pick up the pillow, put it back. That's the way it was. But like us now, pillows are not used that way. We put our feet on it, we put our heads on it. So that work is not done anymore. We have just the regular American pillows.
My name is Josephine Carrera, and I was born here in Hawaii, right around where we are right now in Pauoa Valley. And I'm 71 years old. My grandparents came from Portugal, from the Azores and Madeira. They came around 1891 or so. The Portuguese people here are not all interested in their culture until they get to maybe about 30 years old, and then they start looking for their roots. But this is about that age and older, so they were very interested in that. So I continue to do my lecture demonstrations whenever they ask. Well, in 1878 is when the Portuguese first came here to Hawaii to work on the plantations. They were invited by King Kalakaua, who knew a botanist, a German botanist. His name was Mr. Hillebrand. And Mr. Hildebrand had been in Madeira, and he saw that the Madeirans were already producing sugar and supplying the surrounding countries with sugar. So King Kalakaua sent him over to recruit people from Madeira. They came on a 3-year contract, and their contract included the passage over, which was $75. They had when they got here, they had a little cottage to live in and a little patch of land to garden. They had medical supplies and medical attention, and they also had a ration of foods, certain foods. So when the contract was, it was 3 years, and many of them elected to go to Hayward, California, but a lot of them stayed. And among these people, when they came here, though, they brought their families with them. Prior to their coming, there were Japanese and Chinese men working in the plantations, but they only, just the men came. But when the Portuguese came, they brought their whole families with them. And when their contract was over, some elected to go to the mainland, and many of them stayed to become stonemasons, and because on the plantation they built beautiful walls, and also among the people who first came, there were engineers and other skilled workers. The engineers now engineered all the water irrigation systems for many of the plantations here in the islands. So the masons went on to become to build beautiful buildings here. An example of that would be the Bishop Museum and the Punahou School, with those great big blocks, those rocks really, and many of the beautiful buildings, rock buildings downtown Honolulu. Okay, there's a funny story really, that when the Portuguese left here to settle in, after their contract was over, settled in California, most of them went to Hayward, and they settled in a little community there, and they wanted to be together, I guess, you know. So there were other Portuguese there already who came directly from Portugal, and when the Portuguese from Hawaii came over, they named that little community Kanaka Row, because that was all people from Hawaii that went there. So, anyway, so the Portuguese came here in 1878, but in 1879 there was a second ship that came. There were 3 ships that came from Madeira first, and then later on they came from the Azores. You know, growing up, I have to tell you this little story. Growing up, the Portuguese from Madeira and the Portuguese from the Azores were always, I don't know how to say, against one another, sort of, you know, because my island is better than your island, and we do this and we do that. So I always tell, when there's a lot of Azorians in the audience that I know, you know, I'll tell them, well, you know, there were 3 ships from Madeira that came to Hawaii. And then later on, the Azorians caught on, and they came, and they started to come also. But in 1879, the second ship that came, the first ship was the Priscilla, the second ship was the Ravenscrag, and aboard that ship there was a gentleman, I think his name was Mr. Fernandez, but I know Mr. Fernandez was one that played. He brought his little instrument to while away the hours, because it took me 4 to 6 months to get here from Portugal on the sailing ship. And so he played his cavaquinho all the way. And when he got here, he played his cavaquinho, and King Kalakaua, as a musician that he was, he enjoyed the sound of this little instrument, and the Hawaiians really enjoyed the sound also. And Mr. Fernandez was often asked to go to the palace. Incidentally, we have the only palace in the whole United States here in Hawaii, in Oahu. And he would be invited to come to the palace to play for the dignitaries at big functions of the king, because he played it so well. And when the Portuguese played the cavaquinho, they picked more than they strummed, and their fingers naturally are going all over the neck of the ukulele. And so the Hawaiians said, "Oh my gosh, that's like a jumping flea. His fingers look like jumping fleas." So they renamed the cavaquinho ukulele. And I think that's one of a real big contribution that Portugal brought to Hawaii. It was, the Hawaiians loved it because they could take this little instrument instead of taking a big guitar to a luau and playing, and it accompanied complemented their voices quite well. So there was no way to get cavaquinhos here, so there was a man, his name is Leslie Nunes. He was a cabinet maker in Portugal, so he saw a good prospect of a good business here. So he started manufacturing the ukuleles. And of course, when in 1935, when the Hawaiians were invited to go to San Francisco for a big show there, that was the first time that they took along with them, instead of just the drums and the guitars and everything, they took this little ukulele. And from there, the popularity just zoomed, because everybody saw this little Hawaiian ukulele, but it's a Portuguese instrument from the island of Madeira. And I think that's a big, along with everything else that they contributed to Hawaii, like the stonemasons, and they became bishops, and they became priests. And my aunt had two cousins that were nuns, and they had doctors, Dr. Felix and all this. And they assimilated very well and got into good positions here in Hawaii. Okay, in 1913, the Portuguese stopped immigrating to Hawaii. And from then on, the language was lost, gradually lost, and the only culture that we see today being shown is is from word of mouth down through the generations. Like for me, I had to learn all of these things, and those, in my days, no TV or anything like that. And what's missing today is that the families don't get together and talk. Talk, how we call it here in Hawaii, talk story. And we heard many, many stories, and that's the way we learned about our culture, as little as I did. But I also went to school to try to learn the language, but I was so busy doing all of these other things that I really didn't learn the language, but I did learn how to sing. And I chose songs, and I fell in love with fado. So I sang a few fados. But before I sing anything, I have to find out what it's all about, because you can't sing without your emotions in it. So I solicit the help from our teacher. There's two teachers that taught Portuguese here. Ceci Brown, she is from Brazil, and our good friend Herbert Carlos. So I would find out what the song is saying, and then I put in my own emotions to that. The one tradition that we have here in the islands that have survived all these years is the Feast of the Holy Ghost. And it mostly came from the islands, the Azores Islands and everything. We have 3 Holy Ghost societies here in Hawaii, on Oahu alone. And each year, right after Easter time, they start their festival. And the festival lasts 7 weeks. In the old days, they would have 7 families that would take on what they call a dominga. 1 week was a dominga. And they would have in their homes a room set aside where they would put the Holy Ghost crown, which many came from Portugal, the silver crown. And then they would have another place where they would have entertainment and food for the people that came by. Then after that weekend would be over, the crown would go to another house. The second Domingo holder would have it in her house, and she would do the same. And I understand that they would process to the next house, and they would sing a little song that they went as they went to the next house, and the young ladies would carry a basket filled with petals, rose petals or flower petals, and this was to ask for donations toward the Holy Ghost. And I assumed that the petals were to hide the amount that each one was putting in, and I thought that was kind of nice. But they went from house to house, and then after that they would have a big festival at the Holy Ghost grounds. Well, we do the same thing today in the 3 Holy Ghost societies. There's one in Kalihi, one in Kaka'ako, and there's one right up here in Punchbowl. And they do the 7 Dominguez, although it's not going to anybody's houses. They have a chapel, and especially, I want to especially mention the Holy Ghost Festival in Punchbowl, because this land was given to them by the king for that purpose. And if at one time they do not have their Holy Ghost festivals, it would revert back to the government. So we still continue our Holy Ghost festivals every year. The way we do it is that we have the 7 Dominguez, and each at the 7th Domingo, at the end of the first feast, when they have the feast day, each one, if they wanted to be involved the next year, they would put their name in a little bowl, and then they would roll, the Holy Ghost people would roll it up into a little roll, and then they would have another bowl with another rolled up paper. So when the next year comes around, they'll pick the name, and then they'll pick another rolled up paper which says if you have the first Domingo, second Domingo, or whatever it corresponds. So the people are still very active in these Holy Ghosts, although, you know, things do change, you know, and things get a little bit more expensive. When Queen Isabella, who started this Holy Ghost festival because her country was struck by famine, and she prayed to God, and if he would spare her country, she would relinquish her crown for a day and feed all the people in a big festival. And that's what the Holy Ghost is. That's what we do here. So the person who gets the 7th Domingo gets to choose the queen. And just so happen, next year I have the 7th Domingo, and I will choose a queen. So the queen is crowned by the priest at church. They will process with all of the statues. They carry the statues on their shoulders, and each Domingo has a different statue. The first one is the flag of the Holy Ghost, and the second is Blessed Mother, and the third and fourth. The fourth one is St. Anthony, and that's an important one for us because he was Portuguese. And then Santo Cristo, what they call it in the 6th Domingo, is the Christ, and others. So they have a procession from the Holy Ghost grounds to the Blessed Sacrament Church here, this Punchbowl Holy Ghost. And then the Royal Hawaiian Band plays every time, and they play the hymn of the Holy Ghost. And you know, the Portuguese as they are, they always have a joke for everything, right? And this tune, when the band plays it, it's da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-dum, and they're hitting their cymbals and everything. And so the Portuguese renamed it the Papas Compão. Papas Compão. But that's another story.